Okay, we have lots of material to get through today. I've collapsed all of Darwin's botanical works into this one lecture. So I may skip briefly over some things which you can look at in more detail on the slides. Okay, this is Darwin's house today, Darwin House. It's a museum, it's been nicely restored, and even the gardens preserve the original layout they had during Darwin's lifetime. Just nearby is this little footpath that goes through a wood. It was Darwin's thinking path. He used to go for a stroll there every day, a few rounds. It was called the Sand Walk, which when I first went there was disappointing to see it's kind of paved now. It's not a sand paved, it's paved. And because so many tourists walk on it, they had to. So when we think of Darwin, I suppose you probably think of Darwin's finches or the beard or monkeys or something like that. And it's not very well known that Darwin was such a botanist. Actually, I always used to say that he was not a botanist, it's just a hobby. Yet his discoveries and his innovations were making him one of the most profound botanists of the century. So, what is it? It's a flower, yes, it's a flower. It's an orchid. Why is it shaped like that? Why does it look like that? Before Darwin, there were no answers to those questions other than so that they look pretty. They're just made that way. So Darwin started his work on orchids as a hobby, like many of his big research projects. It started as a hobby and went on for a long time. And just like there was a big collecting craze in Victorian times for fancy pigeons or fancy funky chickens, as I've shown you, there was also a big craze for orchids because they are very beautiful. People like to collect pretty things. And of course, many, many species were coming from around the world that had not been previously seen. And people were also making new ones. So Linnaeus, you remember Carl Linnaeus, the man at the bottom of the slide there, he knew of only about 100 species of orchids in his great book on classification in 1758. But by the time we're talking about, by 1860, there were over 6,000 species. There's a massive increase in the awareness of the diversity of orchids that exists. So one of the conventional explanations was that the reason that orchids look so nice and pretty is that they were created to please us. Because they do please us. We like looking at them. But Darwin knew this could not be true. First of all, because some flowers only flower at night, and some of them exist in parts of the world where there are no people. So how could they have been created to please human eyes if there are no human eyes around to see them? That was an inconsistent. So we're kind of going back in time after the previous lecture that said Planet Rage. So we're going back to just after The Origin of Species was published. The controversy is raging, and rather than publishing a book of supporting evidence for his theory, directly, just about his theory, he publishes a book on orchids instead, which you might think is a bit odd. This is his greenhouse as it survives today. It was originally 3 times longer than this, but I think when they restored it, they couldn't afford to restore it to its full size. Remember, Darwin was rich, so he had plenty of money to support his hobbies. This is the inside. You can see the pipes there, through which it was heated in winter. Early steam heating. So this is where Darwin conducted many of his experiments, including those on orchids. So, contrary to what you might expect, the first book Darwin published after The Origin of Species was his book on orchids. And this is one of the issues that he was trying to tackle. It's a book that backs up his theory by looking at the tiny details to show that his theory can explain and answer things, even down to the tiniest detail of flower petals, that no other theory could previously explain. He wanted to argue that orchids are the way they are, and all flowers are the way they are, as a means to make sure that plants can do what is otherwise rather difficult for them to have sex, to reproduce, to exchange genetic information, as we would now call it, with another individual, since, as you know, plants don't move, they're stuck. They need to have sex with another individual somewhere else. And flowers are the structures that the flowering plants use to secure that. Before Darwin, people believed that they just self-pollinated. There was no mystery that you had to pollinate a flower. People did this with little paintbrushes. They would take a pollen and they would pollinate flowers to cross them or to grow seeds for more orchids or whatever. But Darwin was convinced, because of his theoretical grounding, that this shouldn't be true. Surely he thought that plants need to reproduce with another individual rather than just themselves, because if they just had sex with themselves, as it were, then they would be making just identical copies of themselves. There would be no significant variation for natural selection to pick up on. And any species that does that didn't vary, he thought would be ultimately in the long term doomed, because it wouldn't be able to change and adapt to a changing world. It would be just copy, and if things changed, it would no longer be able to fit in. So this is the book. It's the only one that actually has any color in it. It's all the book, with the unbelievably long title on the various contrivances by which British and foreign orchids are fertilized by insects, and on the good effects of intercrossing. I don't know why he called it British and foreign. Why don't you say orchids? It would mean the same thing. But by the word contrivances, he means adaptations. The structures look like they have been contrived. The structures look like they have been designed. Of course, Darwin means by designed that natural selection has created that appearance as if they were designed. So, this is just a little bit of background on the fact that plants have sexes. I suppose this will be familiar to you from your school biology days. Okay, so here's one of the illustrations from Darwin's book. He's looking at the early purple orchid, or the Orchis mascula. And he's dissected it into all its little pieces in this diagram to show what all the different parts do, that they function, kind of like a machine, in order to achieve pollen pollination. Now, many flowers distribute their pollen in different ways. The previous theorists thought that orchids just pollinate themselves because nobody had ever seen anything pollinating them. They just made seeds. You have an orchid and it just works. So obviously it's just dropping pollen on itself. That's what people thought. Darwin thought this cannot be true. Now these little things in the middle of the slide there are called pollinia, which you can see on this slide. They're basically pollen packets that grow in these little stalks inside the flower. You see one on what looks like a chopstick there on the bottom there. Those are the little pollen packets. So, how do they actually do this? Well, this is what you can do with an orchid if you're naughty and you feel like playing dirty with a flower. You can do this, as Darwin did with a pencil or something. You can insert a pencil into the flower and tickle its fancies, and the pollen packets will stick to the pencil as you withdraw it. And after a short time, I think because the viscous glue that adheres to the foreign object dries, and then after a time the pollinia bends forward, so that if you were to take that pencil and go to another orchid and play naughty again, it's that pollinia is in exactly the right position to rub pollen on the right part of another flower and so fertilize it. So there you go, plant sex with a pencil. Sex toys with plants. Okay, I won't read out all the quotes because we have so many slides today, but you've got them all there. Please read them. Okay, now Darwin wasn't just doing this because he liked to play dirty with flowers, but to prove the point. He was convinced that insects must be pollinating orchids. And this is an important one. This is so obvious to us that it's easy to overlook. In fact, some Darwin biographers in their book, written some years ago, I won't name names, but they claimed that Darwin was on holiday somewhere and he spent hours watching insects pollinate orchids. Well, no, he didn't. In fact, he says on the first page of his book, I have been watching orchids for 20 years and I have never once seen an insect pollinate one. Hence the mystery that he is trying to solve with his studies and experiments. He's convinced that it has to be done, this is from a modern book, that it has to be an insect going in there instead of a pencil. So, how to prove what you cannot see? This is very Darwinian. He can't see it, but he knows it must be happening. So how to prove it? One of the things he did was he covered some orchids in his greenhouse with a glass dome. Others he did with some mesh, very fine netting like ladies' stockings, so the hair could get through, and others he left uncovered. And every morning he would stroll out and check, and guess what? The ones that were covered up, there was no change. Their pollinia was still there. But the ones that were uncovered, they were missing pollinia more and more every morning. So they had been doing something at night, and exactly with some intermediary, these flowers. But he couldn't see what it was. Well, one scientist sent him a head of moth, which had all these pollinia stuck on the end of its proboscis. So this moth had obviously been visiting many orchids before it dropped dead, probably from exhaustion. So it had clearly been sticking its proboscis down into the orchids to drink nectar, and every time it did so, it did what Darwin was doing with the pencil. Got pollinia stuck on it, flew off to another flower, and while trying to get a drink, inadvertently fertilizes the flower. So all of these structures are placed in just the right way that they do the job. And Darwin wants to explain how that has happened and how his theory can explain it. Okay, so through these experiments and others, Darwin demonstrated to everyone's satisfaction that, okay, the flowers are specifically adapted to attract insects, and for the insect to manipulate the insect so that it lands on it in just the right way. It's trying to drink from the nectar at the bottom, which exactly places it in the right place to contact the pollinia, to get them stuff on its head, and so forth. So how did all this come about to be exactly the right way? Think of it this way. Darwin calculated that some orchids bear between 6,000 and 186,000 seeds per plant. So if one plant's seeds grew successfully, the great-grandchildren of that plant would cover the entire earth, at least all the land. It would be wall-to-wall carpeting with that orchid, or with that orchid's offspring. Right? This is again the power of the Malthus theory of population explosion. The fact of this potential explosion, which of course does not happen, right? We are not living in a world that's completely covered with orchids. What that means is that they are dying or being killed or failing to live, failing to survive. They are losing in the struggle of existence at about the same rate at which allows them to keep their population levels steady. What that means is that there is incredible struggle going on, virtually, not consciously, of course. Seeds are not consciously struggling with each other. But what that means is that the slightest difference between plants, or between the seeds themselves, will make the difference between which ones survive and which ones don't. there is vicious competition simply by virtue of the numbers. So if a flower is petal is, this gives Darwin all the ammunition he needs for his theory to do the job. If a flower varies in a certain way in which the insects access the nectar just a little bit better, or they land in just the right position, or vary in the wrong way, that the insect can get a nice drink and get out of there without getting any pollinia stuff on it, guess what's going to happen to that one? It's going to lose out in the competition. Giving away free drinks to marauding insects who don't help you, dead end. So, severe checks. That's as Darwinian as it gets. Now, a little film clip from a documentary a few years ago. Let's see if we can play. There's the audio. There it is.
Because it introduces variation in animals. Variations are important since they can improve the offspring's chance of success. They might be faster, stronger, or a better fit to the environment. So Darwin argues that sex is necessary for natural selection to occur. But if this is the case, he has to explain plants. They don't seem to fit his theory at all. In Darwin's day, botanists believed that plants reproduce with themselves. Botanists think this because each flower contains both male and female sex organs. They assume that since the organs are so close together, it is easy for the pollen from the male part to fertilise the female part. This self-fertilisation produces almost identical offspring. Darwin realised if this was true, it was a real problem for his theory. All the offspring of the plant would be very similar, certainly not different enough for evolution to happen. To save his theory, Darwin needs to show that plants have sex with different individual plants. Only in this way can plenty of variation be created. He sets out to prove the botanist wrong, and I'm going to the place where he starts. It's down back, one of Darwin's favourite haunts, and with me is local nature expert Alistair Hayes.
So Alistair, we're here at Down Bank, and Darwin loved this place. I mean, for him it's as impressive as somewhere like the Galapagos, isn't it?
It was, and it was so close to his home. It's only 2 fields away from their house. He'd been round the world, and he finds this place, and he thinks it's so inspirational. I mean, he brings his family here for picnics, but whilst they're eating, he does his work on this side.
Right, the flower for Darwin must have been a conundrum. He's thinking, right, I've got this whole theory, it all fits in place, but flowers cause him a problem.
Cause of a problem which he solved on this site. So he came out here, and he came out on days like this, and he looked at the insects flying around. He looked at the butterflies came out at night, and looked at the moths. And really close examination of these species, and he saw on their heads, on their tongues, were actually the pollen, the male parts from some of the flowers, and they were actually flying off to another flower. So he started to think, well, hold on a minute, this is the way the pollen gets moved from plant to plant, and how they can reproduce between 2 parents.
It's amazing. And so this very site was fundamental and underpinning Darwin's theory.
It was.
You might wonder why they're going on and on about it being this site. That's because Alistair was involved in the campaign to get it earmarked as a historic site or something. So they kind of let him plug his campaign of this documentary.
A few early botanists had noticed that bees carry pollen from one flower to another. but they assumed that this is a rare and insignificant event. Darwin is now convinced that insects are full-time artificial inseminators for plants, and flowers have evolved every detail of their colour, scent and shape for one purpose only, to make sure insects will visit them and carry their pollen to other flowers. Incredible. Yes, to everyone except Darwin. But how can he demonstrate it? I'm at Kew Gardens to do another Darwin experiment. The subject is a tropical orchid, one of the most elaborate flowers in existence. The first challenge for me, as for Darwin, is to get hold of one. They're rare, fickle, and only flower for 1 week a year.
Here we have one of the largest collections of orchids in the world, and Kew is is probably the largest research institute for orchids here.
Now, you're an expert on orchids, and Darwin was obsessed with orchids as well, wasn't he?
Yes, Darwin was very, very passionate, and he actually said that of any subject, orchids were his main passion.
What have we got here?
This is one of Darwin's favourite orchids. It's kind of the orchid that he was using for a lot of his pollination studies. This is Cassacetum from South America.
Okay.
And it's got a very elaborate pollination mechanism, which is what Darwin was most interested in.
Darwin uses a pencil to mimic the insect. As it enters the Cassacetum flower, it presses against the trigger. A delicate membrane breaks and releases a package of pollen. The sticky base of this package adheres to its back. If it's an insect, it flies away with the pollen in the perfect position to pollinate the next flower.
This is his bee.
Yes.
He's pollinating bee, in effect. So he basically tickled the fancies of the flower and got it to discharge its pollen.
Yes.
Right. So, okay, I'm going to have a go at this. So I'm just going to poke the pencil in and hopefully trigger the...
Yeah, to shoot out. Yeah. Go for the hairs at the back.
Just where? Just in here?
Yeah, just the little antenna that's coming down.
The pollen catapults out so fast, we need a specialist camera to see it. With this observation, Darwin proves a Cassacetum goes to extraordinary lengths to ensure it fertilises another Cassacetum.
That is a bit of the structure that shoots out.
Yeah, so at the back here you've got this is a sticky pad.
Yeah.
And it's almost like glue, it sticks to the back of the insect.
And on the other end, there's the 2 pads of pollen.
Yeah, so that's the pollen.
Oh, that's amazing, isn't it? Very beautiful.
Yeah.
Darwin believes that the elaborate pollination mechanisms of orchids must have evolved. Before Darwin, the conventional view was that you didn't have to explain why they're so elaborate. God had simply decided to design them that way. This was a big challenge for Darwin. It meant that he had to be able to look at the orchid and any other part of nature and account for every single thing about it. In some orchids, the pad the insect lands on is a modified petal, as is the nectary where the nectar is stored. Over millions of years, the plants co-opted various parts of their anatomy to form the structures which ensure that the plants do not mate with themselves. Is key to evolution because it introduces variation in animals.
Sorry, I replayed that somehow. So the other thing that Darwin did with his experiments was that he wanted to prove that this really mattered. So he would self-fertilize plants himself with a little paintbrush. He would take their pollen and fertilize them. After all, that's what most people believed was happening. He then let others be, he had others which he cross-pollinated between different individuals. He then calculated the number of seeds that each plant produced. And those which had self-pollinated had a very poor turnout in number of seeds. They didn't work as well. Whereas those that were pollinated from another individual produced loads of seeds. This was additional evidence. So confident was Darwin about how these mechanisms work that this orchid, which grows in Madagascar, has an enormous nectary dangling underneath it. That's what that long, dangly structure is. And Darwin was convinced that if it has a nectary that is that long, there must be a moth somewhere with a proboscis long enough to drink the nectar from the bottom of it, even though no one had ever seen such a thing. And it was kind of it sounded like a crazy prediction. And so he wrote that there must be moths with proboscis capable of extension to a length of between 10 and 11 inches. And Wallace later wrote an article in which he illustrated this predicted moth, which had not yet been found. And in 1903, it was after Darwin's death, it was discovered. There it is. Oh, I forgot to put a link to the video clip here. So I'll have to hunt for it. Which one is that? Moth predicted that.
But there is one whose life story is even more astonishing. Many flowers produce a sweet nectar to entice insects and other animals to come and pollinate them. But this orchid from Madagascar, the comet orchid, carries its nectar at the end of extremely long spurs from the back of its flower. What on earth could have a tongue long enough to reach down those huge long spurs? Charles Darwin, who studied the fertilization of orchids, decided it could only be a moth, but nobody had ever seen it, until some years after his death, he was proved right. This is Xanthopan morgani predictor. Morgan's predicted sphinx moth. With special night vision cameras, we can show why such an immensely long tongue is needed. It's a third of a metre long. Exactly the same length as the spur beneath the flower.
Yeah, so the moth is adapted to the orchid, and the orchid is adapted to the moth. It's a case of both being co-adapted for each other. Why? Well, one of the reasons is that no other insect can feed from that kind of orchid. So that means, for the moth's point of view, there is a supply of nectar out there that other kinds of moths and insects aren't going to be taking. So there's no competition. That's your source. From the orchid's point of view, they can be very sure that the insects that come to them are going to go to another member of their species next, rather than, say, go to some other kind of flower or other kind of tree, which might waste their pollen and their nectar. Some flowers are so numerous that they can take that risk in it. So this is just one of these strategies that some species have evolved. Oh, and by coincidence, I just got a letter from David Attenborough on my way to the lecture, which is very nice. He thanks me for my latest book, which I sent him, and he spotted a mistake. Damn. I'll fix it up in the next edition. It was I shouldn't tell you, but I got my caption on one of the Birds of Paradise Society wrong. I attributed it to the wrong artist, and he's a huge fan of Birds of Paradise, as you can probably guess. He's done so many documentaries and books about them. So he knew exactly who the artist of Paradise was, and I got it wrong. Oh, well, nobody's perfect. Okay. Except for David. Okay. So, Darwin demonstrated that flowers had just the right structure to guide insects into the right position because of the stick, as you have seen. Yes, and so one of the points I want you to remember about this is that he showed that plants are just as rich with intricate adaptations as animals, and that their adaptations have been cobbled together from pre-existing elements. For example, in the clip there, you heard about how some of the structures of the flowers are modified petals, or modified, some of them are modified leaves in some plants. That's the way natural selection usually works. And there's another long quote by Darwin, which you can read at your leisure. And this is what, okay, I'll read you this one. Darwin's predicting. He says, at a period not far distant, naturalists will hear with surprise, perhaps with derision, that grave and learned men formerly maintained that such useless organs were not remnants retained by inheritance, but were specially created and arranged in their proper places like dishes on a table. This is a simile of a distinguished botanist. You can hear Darwin scoffing there, by an omnipotent hand to complete the scheme of nature. That was one of the kinds of theories that previous naturalists had concocted to explain why things are arranged where they are. They didn't understand the purpose of structures, especially here he's talking about vestigial structures that no longer have a function. They thought that they were designed that way in order to make the scheme of nature more complete. And Darwin said, no, they're not designed. They're just leftovers from something that once did have a function. And often you can see that the structure has a function in a related plant, for example. Okay, here's some reactions to Darwin's book. So, Creationist Critique is by the Duke of Argyll in his book The Reign of Law, which is a book arguing against Darwinism. And he pointed out that Darwin used language like purpose and intention, as if it was the same as when one is talking about a creator doing the work. And he, of course, believed that a creator was doing the work. And he didn't like Darwin's theory in which natural selection was doing the work, or supposedly creating structures that look designed. So he was not convinced. Darwin's friend Asa Gray, the great American botanist, he wrote to Darwin, if the Orchid book, with a few trifling omissions, had appeared before the Origin, the author would have been canonized rather than anathematized by the natural theologian. In other words, the book sounded like the kind of book that people into natural theology, like Paley, would have written. In other words, it showed how the world was so, things in the living world are so perfectly designed, and all of these structures can be explained by virtue of their function and purpose. And so, but of course, Darwin was explaining that the appearance of design by natural selection. But it was so similar, Gray thought, to the kinds of earlier works which would have attributed all of these things to divine design instead. Oops, I've got a typo there. Darwin told his Gray. Darwin told Gray that Gray was the only person to realize that the Orchid book was a flank movement on the enemies of Darwin's theory. In other words, Darwin revealed that his book was a kind of surreptitious attack on his critics by using their own language and their own favorite theories to show that his theory actually did the designing, that natural selection did the designing, not something else. So in 1874, Gray praised Darwin for finding, this is in a published account, the explanation of all these and other extraordinary structures, as well as the arrangement of blossoms in general, and even the very meaning and need of sexual propagation in plants. The aphorism, nature abhors close fertilization, and the demonstration of the principle belong to our age and to Mr. Darwin, to have originated this, and also the principle of natural selection, the truthfulness and importance of which are evident the moment it is apprehended, and to have applied these principles to the system of nature in such a manner as to make, within a dozen years, a deeper impression on natural history than has been made since Linnaeus, are an ample title for one man's fame. So this was very great indeed. Wish somebody would say something like that about mine. Okay, now on to a completely different kind of plant, what we call insectivorous plants. You've probably all seen these sorts of things like Venus flytraps or whatever catching insects in documentaries before. But what the documentary would not have told you is that it's all based on Darwin's work and Darwin's discoveries. Before Darwin, people could see, I mean, we have pitcher plants here in Singapore, around Asia, and they've got liquid in these little structures, and there's lots of dead insects in there. Wallace, when he was in Malaysia, once drank from one because they ran out of water and he found that it was okay despite all the dead insects in there. But Wallace speculated why those structures exist. Why are there these reservoirs that fill with liquid? One writer in the 1850s suggested that these were created by a divine creator in order to keep the number of insects down by drowning lots of them, because they're full of dead insects. They obviously kill a lot of insects. No one had any idea that this was, I can't use the word intentional, but that the plants are adapted to do this. That is a discovery made by Darwin. So he turned his eye to insectivorous plants. Why are insects captured or stuck on these kinds of plants? Now, before Darwin proposed this thought, it was just an accident. Well, it's sticky, and flies get stuck on them. That's it. Game over. No more explanation needed. Darwin was convinced there had to be a reason. It had to be of benefit to the plants to do this, because they have all the structures needed to catch insects. So this is called sundews, if you're not familiar with them, because of the little droplets on there. They look like dew, but they're not. They're secreted by the plant. So Darwin published his work on this topic in his book Insectivorous Plants in 1875, which I think actually is the shortest book title we've ever had. Good for him. So here are some of the drawings from the book, in which he showed not just the structure of a typical sundew, but the steps or stages through which they go when they capture an insect. He showed that these bizarre structures on sundews are modified leaves. So again, they have evolved from an earlier structure on these plants. And then he experimented with what will make them react. Now, if you drop a stick on one, it won't do anything. If you drop a pebble on one, it won't do anything. If you drop a fly on one, it will gradually curl up over the fly. Why? It's a plant, it's stupid. It doesn't have eyes, it doesn't have a brain. How does it know? Well, it doesn't know. It doesn't know anything, but why does it do that? How come it reacts only to... so he tried all sorts of different substances. He tried human hair, he tried bits of boiled egg, he even tried human urine. And it was obvious that substances that contain nitrogen would make the plant react. And in fact, things that had even more nitrogen would make it react more strongly. So little bits of glass or pebbles would not cause any reaction at all. Okay, so plants are trapping insects. Why do they do this? Darwin then kept on studying, and he showed that the plants, and this was completely bonkers, he showed that the plants digest the insects that they trap. That they excrete chemical substances that were, when he had them analyzed, strikingly similar to the digestive juices in the stomachs of animals. Not identical, but very similar. So the plants were not just getting things stuck on them, as people had thought before, but were in fact capturing prey, killing it, and eating their bodies. Slurp, slurp. Yummy. So, here's another one of course, I think I'll leave you to digest these on your own. Sorry. The quote at the bottom here I advise you to look carefully at that one. Here Darwin is speculating on how these processes could have come about. And he speculates on how that you see in nature every stage of what would have been the gradual evolution of these complex structures. So, for example, there are plants which make little excretions for other purposes, for example, to get rid of excess liquids or excess chemicals. Insects can get stuck on those, and that is accidental. Right? So, plants exist which get insects stuck on them accidentally. Darwin thinks that was probably the early stage for how the sundews evolved. Then, would there have been an advantage to plants that got insects stuck on them and that died? Darwin argued yes, because these plants only live in places where there is very waterlogged soil, like marshes and bogs. And the nitrogen content of the soil, because it's so waterlogged and water is always passing through, the nitrogen content of the soil is very poor. But the nitrogen content of insects is very high. So if an insect dies on you and rots, say at your base, your roots can suck up that nitrogen and that plant will do better. Fast forward a few thousands of generations, those that get the insects stuck on them a bit better are doing better. Maybe they can even colonize further out into the marshy areas where other plants with no ability to have nitrogen added to them can never colonize, cannot grow out there because it's too nutrient poor. And so step by step, there will be a bias for plants that capture them better, that can absorb their materials better, and so forth. And that's what he found. So, for example, some plants have hairs that trap raindrops, which insects were trapped and died. But the hairs were not there originally to trap insects, but they're there as a means of repelling water. Okay, now I've got a couple more film clips which will show this more clearly. So there's a sundew.
Roraima also has sundews. Like sundews elsewhere, they catch insects in a way that is a family speciality. The sparkling drops on the leaf hairs are not sweet, but insects nonetheless are attracted to them. They are, however, extremely sticky, as any inquisitive insect immediately discovers. The hairs move swiftly. One can turn through 180 degrees in less than a minute. So even though an insect may have been caught initially by only 1 or 2 hairs, others nearby quickly fold over it, and soon it is held fast. Species on Roraima, like the bannerworts and the carnivorous pitcher, occur only on these plateaus. Plants may seem passive and inactive, but in fact they move. These are among the most mysterious. Sundews. The leaves, like those of other plants, use sunlight to help them grow. But their glistening tentacles get food in another way. They are traps. Plants, to grow properly, need sunlight and water.
I don't know why I cut it off there. That's bad editing. Okay. Let's take your 5-minute break and then we'll carry on in 5 minutes. move on to another one, Venus's flytrap, which is probably the most famous insectivorous plant. You can get these in lots of garden centres because they move and they're quite cute and play with them. I tried growing them in my greenhouse in Cambridge and they all always died, I think, because I fed them too many flies. It says on the instructions, don't overfeed them. Of course, they overfeed them. I think a lot of people do that. So, this is what they look like. Again, modified leaves on these plants carry out another function than what leaves normally do, which is that they catch sunlight and they generate energy. These have become modified to move in ways that we'll see with these. Even more David Attenborough video games.
In this swampy pine forest in North Carolina, animals don't eat it, it eats animals. And there's one right here. This is Venus's flytrap. It shapes its traps from the ends of its leaves. One or two hairs on their surface act as triggers. Here comes a meal. Touch the hair, and the trap is sprung. There's now no escape. The beetle's struggles stimulate the plant to close the trap even more tightly. It now produces digestive acids from glands on the inner surface of the leaf, which first kill and then dissolve its victim's body. Growing in the same Carolina swamp, there's another carnivorous plant. These are the trumpet pitchers. They, like the Venus's flytrap, find so little nutriment in this impoverished, waterlogged soil that they supplement it with the bodies of animals. Their traps are also formed from leaves, but leaves that have been folded lengthways to make a vertical tube which fills with water. These spectacular trumpets may look like flowers, but of course they're not. Though, in a sense, this bright yellow top to them serves the same purpose as a petal. It's an advertisement of a delicious reward, and the reward itself is under here. Sweet nectar. But if an insect comes to collect it and strays into the mouth of the trumpet, then it's doomed. Inside of the throat of the trumpet is covered with microscopic downward pointing spines. As long as it stays on the rim, the ant is all right. But if it strays off it, it falls into a pond of water and drowns. The tiny corpse dissolves and the marsh pitcher absorbs the resulting soup. And where one ant goes, others are likely to follow. The marsh pitcher attracts other animals too. This frog may be hoping to eat some of the insects before the pitcher does.
Please.
A Venus flytrap. It catches insects with booby traps. the leaves are baited with a sweet nectar. But lower down, there are a few upright bristles. Triggers. Many things might accidentally touch one of them, so a single touch has no effect. But a fly crawling around on the leaf sipping the nectar is likely to touch more than one of the bristles. And if it touches two within 20 seconds, that's different. It's thought that the trigger hairs work by releasing a rudimentary electric impulse. The victim's desperate attempts to find a way out simply trigger more hairs and encourage the trap to close even more tightly. The plant begins to release juices rich in hydrochloric acid. It will take 10 days to completely digest its meal. Put it into a tube. The process is more complex. A shoot appears that looks just the same as those that turn into normal leaves. Over a period of several days, flanges develop near the end and open out to form the blade of a leaf. But then the tip of the midrib continues to grow.
Just to make clear, this is with time-lapse photography, okay? They don't actually move this fast.
Once it touches the ground, it begins to inflate. The lid opens to expose the plant's lethal pollen. Some of the bigger species may produce half a dozen or so of these huge, elegant traps.
I think the sound effects department got a bit carried away on this. Because of course with time-lapse photography there's no sound. This has been filmed over a week, so they have to add sound to make it more interesting. Or whatever it is they've done, I don't know if you call that interesting. Entertaining.
Perhaps the most extraordinary picture of them all. The evidence is that it too attracts small mammals. It secretes a sort of nectar from the underside of the lid there, and that attracts little tree shrews. This engaging little animal is...
You won't believe what's going to happen next. It's not what you expect.
Tupaya montana, the mountain tree shrew. It feeds on fruit and any insects it can find. It also visits pitcher plants. Until recently, what happens next was a mystery. This footage seems to show that the animal has found a way of evading the slippery death trap. What is more, it's feeding on the underside of the pitcher's lid. This pitcher doesn't get its nutriment from the bodies of dead animals. It's got another way of sustaining itself.
What's
The
happening?
tree shrews come to lick it. Well,
I think the file size may be too big.
they do. Their rear end is directly over the pitcher so that their droppings fall into it. And it's that that provides this plant with its nourishment.
Yummy.
It's even been suggested that that nectar contains a laxative to persuade the tree shrew to do just that. The stability of the rainbow.
Okay, now here's another kind that Darwin discussed, which you may not be as familiar with. This is a water plant, the type of water plant, Utricularia, their common name is bladderworms. And they also trap insects, but of course they're aquatic ones.
Called Utricularia, bladderworms. These tiny wrigglers are mosquito larvae, and they are among its prey. The bladders that give the plant its name are not floats. They too are traps. Each bladder contains a partial vacuum and has a one-way entrance. By slowing down the action 240 times, we can see how they work. With the slightest touch, the door flies open inwards, sweeping the prey inside. It all happens in less than a millisecond. Utricularia is the plant world's swiftest killer.
Swiftest killer indeed. So, even though nowadays with natural history films like this, the fact that plants catch, kill, and digest insects is very well known to all of us, but what most people have forgotten is that this was discovered by Darwin, which is actually quite a big jump over the botanical knowledge of his forebears and his contemporaries. Okay, now we'll move on to a different kind of botanical work, climbing plants, of which we have an abundance in Southeast Asia because we live in the tropics. So, how do they work? Again, this is another very Darwinian question. If you look at, say, some pretty gazebo or arbor with ivy or wisteria that is wrapped it's quite complicated the way it's intricately wound around external structures and so forth. Because plants move so slowly, and obviously in Darwin's day they didn't have time-lapse photography, it was not possible to know how they move, how they work. So Darwin wanted to figure out, again, it's a very Darwinian question, is that you can't see it happening, but it must happen. So he devised various experiments to try and figure out how climbing plants move. And do they, what powers drive them to the direction that they do? So for example, some respond to stimulated by gravity and touch. So for example, you can take a plant and put its pot sideways, and the plant will grow up because it's affected by gravity. Darwin actually devised an experiment where he bought a bunch of cheap clocks, wind-up clocks, and he put little boxes on the spindle that spins the hands, wound them up so that they would spin, and then he put plants in these so that the effect of gravity would be neutralized. Actually, I don't think he ever put that in his book, but always rather bizarre experiments with Darwin. So, look at this diagram. What on earth is it? They are not very pretty drawings, but can you guess what it is? This is another Darwinian invention, these diagrams, and my laser pointer is not working. Okay. There we go. So, diagram showing the movement of the upper internode of a common pea. So, pea plant. The tendrils move around, but so slowly one cannot see how they move. So Darwin devised a system to observe at different times and making a mark, say on a plate of glass, I'll show you that in a second, where the tendril is now. Come back, and you can see the times he's put down here. So Darwin got up at 8:46 a.m. this day and marked out his position. The tendril was right there at 8:46. Then at 10, use the mouse. Then at the second observation was at 10 a.m. Look, there's 2 there. So he drew a little dot on the glass where the tip of the tendril was. So the tip of the tendril, when he looked at the glass, was here. He came back, and it was here. He came back at 11, and it was at 3, at 4, at 5, and 6. I really need a laser. Okay. So what he's done, in effect, is to invent a time-lapse technology in 2 dimensions to record the motion of the tendril. So you have to use your imaginations, or maybe I'll use the mouse, and it works so much better with the laser pointer. Anyway, imagine my arm is the tendril of the pea plant, and if you follow the motion of the lines in order, you will be able to reconstruct the way the tendril moved, even though you couldn't see it happening. So the tendril went like this, in a sort of spirally motion. Now, nowadays, of course, you can watch that in a time-lapse documentary, and you can see that it spins like this. That was not known before. This is how Darwin discovered it, the way they move. So here's a book explaining one of his techniques. You see this? At different times, he makes a trace in different places to follow how the plant moves through time. Here's a photograph, probably taken by one of his sons, in which he's got a little arm there set up by which he can record the placement of leaves as they move over time. So he used various things. In another case, I think he used a glass dome, or a plate of glass that had soot from a candle. The glass was covered with soot, and he put a little pointer on the end of the tendril, and as it scraped on the glass, it left a tracing showing the way, the pattern in which it moved. Now, all of this allowed Darwin to find out that there is actually something in common in the way plants move. They tend to move through spiraling motions. And this allowed him to discover that the adaptations for climbing that many plants use is a modification of something that is already there. Their growth tends to be in this motion anyway, and then in climbing plants that exaggerate. So what in effect happens is that it is as if the climbing plant is searching space around it, trying to find a structure on which, when they touch something, the plant reacts and then it starts to climb up it. Right? Plants can't see, they can't think, but they climb, they find and climb structures around them. The reason climbing plants climb is that it's another way of getting up to the sunlight. So some plants do this in the brute force way, which is they grow big and thick, like an oak tree or a pine tree, right? Massive body, and they get up there and they get the light and they shade out everything that's shorter than them. Climbing plants cheat. They climb up other things, maybe other trees or other structures like rocks or whatever on the houses. So using very little energy and substance, they get up to where the valuable important light is. So, here's a quote. It has often been vaguely asserted that plants are distinguished from animals by not having the power of movement, but it should rather be said that plants acquire and display this power only when it is of some advantage to them. This being of comparatively rare occurrence, as they are fixed to the ground, and food is brought to them by the air of the rain. So, what's David after a day? Check it out.
Midwinter, and the countryside is so still it seems almost lifeless. But these trees and bushes and grasses around me are living organisms just like animals. And they have to face very much the same sort of problems as animals face throughout their lives if they're to survive. They have to fight one another. They have to compete for mates. They have to invade new territories. But the reason that we are seldom aware of these dramas is that plants, of course, live on a different time scale. But these days, we have ways of speeding things up visually. And then you can see just how dramatic the lives of plants can be. Condense 3 months into 20 seconds, and the desolation of winter quickly warms into the riot of spring. Speed a week into a minute, and you can sense the urgency with which the ground-living plants race to unfurl their flowers. Wood anemones nod attentively at the sun as it rises and sets each day.
Let me explain these clips. You see them, that's the motion that these make during the cycle of a day, but as you notice, the light was the same. And that's a bit of a filming trick, because it's this is actually filmed probably in a studio where they have lighting and they have to keep the lighting constant, otherwise the time-lapse clip will look pretty bad if it goes dark and bright. So that's why you see the light looks constant in most of these clips, because they've been artificially illuminated.
Above, hazel leaves, moving to the same rhythm, pulse as they expand to their full size. Beneath them, the broad leaves of dogs are rising from the ground. foxgloves gape almost alarmingly as they invite insects to come and collect their pollen. Strange though they seem, some plants can move not just their flowers and their leaves, but they can travel from place to place. Take, for example, this bramble. Of all the woodland plants, this is one of the most aggressive. It waves its shoots agitatedly from side to side, as if feeling for the best way forward. And when a shoot settles on its course, it thrusts ahead relentlessly. The invading stem's backward-pointing spines give it the grip it needs to climb over almost anything that stands in its way. It can advance as much as 3 inches in a day. Before long, the shoot will put down rootlets, and then new territory will have been annexed for the bramble's empire.
Empire, indeed, yes. The brambles, which are basically blackberries. I used to have a very aggressive empire of brambles in my back garden in Cambridge. I couldn't hack them back quickly enough. Things were constantly growing back and colonizing my lovely hedge with their nasty prickles. Then again, I do like berries, so I kind of tolerated them. Thanks a bit.
Are in leaf throughout the year. If a plant sitting on the ground beneath such a permanent canopy as this needs sunshine, it will have to climb to get it.
Now keep in mind as you watch this clip the point that Darwin made earlier about the seeds of orchids. In other words, that there is a continuous state of struggle in nature, de facto, not conscious struggle, obviously, although plants look like they're struggling. And that there is competition, and the slightest difference can make, the slightest beneficial variation can make the difference between something living or dying. So here you see what Darwin argued was that even plants are struggling with each other for resources. Literally.
These youngsters search for some kind of ladder by lashing around with their whip-like tendrils. Once one of them gets a grip, it puts a coil in the tendril, so shortening it and pulling itself closer to the branch up which it might climb.
All of this was first described by Darwin.
Other plants ascend by twining their main stem around their support. As a climber gets nearer the canopy and the light, it expands its leaves. There are no more determined competitors faster in this upward scramble than the rattans that live in the forests of Southeast Asia and tropical Australia. A mature rattan produces the longest stem of any plant. One has been measured at 560 feet. The mature plant doesn't develop leaves on its stem down here on the forest floor. It only does that up in the canopy. This luxuriant growth, basking in the full sunshine 200 feet above the ground, is the crown of the rattan, and it makes the plant's character quite plain. It's a kind of palm. The tendrils with which it climbs are so thin they are easily overlooked. But snag one of these on your arm and it will rip your clothes and your flesh. The tendrils are rigid enough to reach up and hook onto the branches of established trees. They then hold the stouter, heavier main stem in position while it grows upwards from the fearsomely protected bud at its tip.
Okay, onwards to another botanical research project. Effects of cross and self-fertilization. So, as Darwin had studied before, he was convinced that self-fertilization was rare rather than just being the norm, and that he's talking about inbreeding, that close inbreeding, both in animals and in plants, is not as good. It results in offspring that are not as fit, not as diverse. Oh, by the way, many books will tell you that Darwin was afraid that because he married Emma, his first cousin, that he himself had engaged in overly close inbreeding, and was afraid that because he was sickly and suffered from mysterious illnesses, we still don't know what they were, but much of his life, he was afraid that his children would suffer, that they would be sickly, and some of them died in childhood. This turns out to be another myth, perpetuated by sloppy historians. What Darwin actually said was that he was afraid that he had passed on his bad health to his children, which was a sound worry because he was sickly. He never said anything about first cousin marriage being too close. In fact, in Darwin's day, it was very common for people, especially in his social class, to marry their first cousin, so it wasn't unusual at all. In fact, I don't think Darwin ever thought of it. In fact, he was once asked by one of his daughters, this is a smoking gun in this particular event, one of his daughters asked him, do you think it's first cousin marriage is too close? And he said no. And when you read his books about interbreeding and so forth, what is too close, it's usually parent-offspring or sibling crossings he would consider to be too close and result in weaker offspring and so forth, rather than a relationship as close as first cousins. Nowadays, in many countries, it's illegal to marry your first cousin because it's believed to be, it is believed to be too close and could lead to birth defects and problems. Is it legal in Singapore? Yes? You cannot marry your first cousin. There you go. Okay, so here's another book. Different forms of flowers on plants of the same species. To which Darwin said, no little discovery of mine ever gave me so much pleasure as making out the meaning of hetero-styled flowers. What are hetero-styled flowers? You should recognize the prefix of this word, hetero, as in heterosexual, which is the opposite of homo. Homo means same, hetero means different. Different styled flowers. So some plants have flowers whose structures are different, as you'll see in the following slides. Before Darwin, some people thought that because they used the tiny parts inside flowers to classify plants, they thought that, well, this one has different parts than that one, so there must be two different species. And Darwin discovered that, in fact, they are the same species, But this was yet another amazing adaptation that the plants had evolved in order to ensure that they would be cross-pollinated. So, styles and stamens of 2 or 3 different lengths were known, right? But these play, Darwin proved, a critical role in ensuring cross-pollination and preventing self-pollination. So here's the illustration from Darwin's book, which is, I'll show you the color one, which is better. So here's the long-styled form of one kind of flower, and here's the short style, another one, right? Darwin said that in fact they are the same species. Here's a nicely dissected real one. This is the same kind of plant, which is a photograph. So here you see, here's the long one, and here's the short one. Darwin argued that these structures ensure that these plants couldn't self-fertilize, and that when they are visited by insects, the way the pollen and so forth are arranged in the parts of these plants ensure that an insect that visited one type would get pollen on it in just the right place to fertilize a plant with the other flower type, therefore ensuring it wasn't your pollen. It must be pollen from another plant type. So here he has dissected away entirely the petals, just showing the structures. After some additional experiment, it became evident that the 2 forms, though both perfect hermaphrodites, bore almost the same relation to one another as the 2 sexes of an ordinary animal. So even though plants have both flowers have both male and female parts, they can't do it with themselves. And these structures ensure that they can only be pollinated in the way that he's indicated with the dotted lines. So, as I say at the bottom of the slide, an ectoseeking insect visiting the flower on the right, the long stamen, exits dusted with pollen. That flies to the flower on the left, which is on a different plant, with the long flower. The pollen on that insect is perfectly positioned to rub off onto that flower's stigma. And then, hooray, it has managed to reproduce. This one was even more complicated. This is called purple loosestrife. This has 3 flower types, and previous botanists had classified them as 3 species. Darwin showed that they're not 3 species, it's just one species that just has 3 flower types, and that the flower types are also to ensure cross-pollination. These are just different strategies that are involved in different plants to make sure, because there is a benefit to them, if they get fertilizer and pollen from another plant, because then their offspring will be more various, more mixed, right? You are a 50-50 mix of your parents. If your parents had just gone to some sort of cloning shop and had a clone made, the clone would be identical. If any species were to do that, were to produce little clones, it's running a very big risk of not lasting very long, because the world is tough and it's constantly changing. So plants and animals have evolved lots of different adaptations to ensure that they get a generous cross-mixture of another individual. In other words, sex matters for Darwin's theory to ensure that there is abundant variation which natural selection can choose from to adapt things to an ever-changing world. This is part of why Darwin was so obsessed with sex per se. I don't mean having sex, but I mean the topic of sex in the animal kingdom. And yes, one of his last books, The Power of Movement in Plants, I won't say that much about it because you can look it up online. 2 more photographs from his collection showed that plants, they move in various ways to protect themselves. So, for example, these 2 photographs are of the same plant. The one on the right is the plant during the daytime, and the one on the left, you see the leaves that are droopy. Darwin described this is the plant asleep. In other words, that it drooped its leaves down, which were a way of protecting it from the cold at night. So it had the power to move its body a little bit in a way that was advantageous. And yet another caricature of Darwin as an Abe, must be baby, there's no tail. Even though he was writing about plants, the reviewers and cartoonists couldn't resist making fun of him. So, that is the quote from his autobiography. In accordance with the principles of evolution, it was impossible to account for climbing plants having been developed in so many widely different groups unless all kinds of plants possess some slight power of movement of an analogous kind. This I proved to be the case, and I was further led to a rather wide generalization, viz. That the great and important classes of movements excited by light, the attraction of gravity, etc., are all modified forms of the fundamental movement of circumnutation. Take note of that word. Circumnutation. It has always pleased me to exalt plants in the scale of organized beings, and I therefore felt an especial pleasure in showing how many and what admirably well-adapted movements the tip of a root possesses. So when he says that many different kinds of plants have a base analogous movement in the first place, it is the rotary growth pattern called circumnutation that he discovered. Okay, those of you who have kindly written to me with suggestions for the technology program, thank you very much. And you're welcome to send me any more suggestions for.
I asked for suggestions of